Hi all, it's Emily Rand with ESPN Esports, and today we're going to dive into some Overwatch, taking a look at the playoff matches that happened this past weekend. I think the team that surprised me the most of all was actually the New York Excelsior. I was not confident in their ability to come into this and adjust as well as they have. One of the main questions was going to be who was going to be playing the Doomfist, and that's actually going to be a recurring theme as I chat about some of these teams. The answer is Libero. But the more important thing that's happened with NYXL is that their read on the meta has been to bring out Sebilby's Bastion, and it's worked incredibly well. Talking to him this past weekend, he actually credited their tank line a lot because he said basically any team in this meta that has a strong tank line is going to do pretty well. And if people remember back when New York Excelsior were still looking like one of the strongest teams in the league in the triple goats meta, one of the reasons that was the case is because, in my opinion, they have one of, if not the best tank in the league in mono. And that is like one of the driving factors behind why they were so successful in goats previously, and then also now why they're similarly looking surprisingly comfortable in this current meta with the Orisa Sigma combination that they've been running with mono on Orisa and then Meko on the Sigma. That's actually, I guess, the heart of a lot of the compositions we're seeing run right now. And so while they have incorporated the Bastion better than any other team in the league, I think the other important part to point out is the strong tank line that NYXL has always had. And now we're seeing that again in a meta that looks, again, surprisingly comfortable for them. I know even like other teams weren't sure how NYXL was going to come in and do. So their performance has been really surprising, and I'm actually really looking forward to their match going up against the Vancouver Titans. This was a match that was really hype in stage one, and then as the Shock kind of rose as the second best, if not the best team in the league, people kind of forgot about the NYXL, even though they were having a pretty strong regular season record. And the Vancouver Titans and the Shock emerged as the two top teams. So the NYXL Vancouver was kind of pushed away. That rivalry was like pushed away to the sidelines for the Shock to come in and face the Titans every time. So I still think that a lot of people are looking at Shock and Titans as the favorites, despite the fact that the Shock did get bumped down to the losers bracket, which was another kind of surprise that we saw from this past weekend. But I wouldn't necessarily count the NYXL out. I do really like their read on this meta. I think they've also been really smart about a lot of their ult timing in team fights, and when they feel like it's a lost fight, they have this ability to back off, regroup, and then reassess the situation and come out on top, which I think that kind of in-game readjustment is incredibly valuable, and not every team can do that. Now, that being said, I'm still picking the Titans, but I do think it's going to be a lot closer than I thought it was going to be, and if New York does go on to actually make it to grand finals out of the winners bracket, I won't be completely shocked. Now, I guess I'm going to avoid the Shock pun, but we are going to move on to Atlanta's upset of the San Francisco Shock. Talking to Choi Hyobin of the Shock this past weekend, he basically said that, the only team that can beat us up is ourselves, and they were not super happy with their performance against the Reign, but they were able to regroup really quickly. It was also a close series, and I think another thing that we were really unsure of Atlanta going into this is, again, who's going to play the Doomfist? The answer is Erster. I wasn't really sure how good his Doomfist is going to be. It turns out it's really good. And that's a running theme with another team I'm going to talk about in a bit, the Hangzhou Spark. I think that is a huge reason why, because as we saw from stage 4, if Erster can just go off on any one of his strong DPS heroes, that is kind of brings Atlanta even more momentum. We've also seen Baby Bay do really well. Atlanta is one of the only teams to use Ashe in this meta, which has actually worked out surprisingly well for them over the Reaper, which is another interesting adaptation that we saw Atlanta specifically use. I think the only drawback to Atlanta is that they are, by their own admission, by other teams' admission, an incredibly momentum-based team. So they need to find that kind of confidence within themselves to do well. And as they continue to do well, they kind of snowball off of their own tempo, which is really cool to watch when they're firing on all cylinders, and really unfortunate to watch when you feel like they're lacking confidence. They'll be taking on the Hangzhou Spark, which is a really interesting matchup for me because I did not expect anything out of the Spark. I actually thought they were going to roll over and get crushed before they could adapt to this meta. And as it turns out, again, we were wondering who's going to play the Doomfist, and the answer is Beji came in and played it. And his Doomfist is insane, which is another pleasant surprise to watch this past weekend. So that's going to be a really interesting matchup because you have a team that historically has struggled to adapt to the meta in the Overwatch League, primarily I think due to just communication issues because their main tank, while again one of the best in the league, he speaks Chinese while the rest of the roster is South Korean. So it does take them a little bit longer to adapt and adjust to metas because of that. But behind Beji's Doomfist, behind their new setup, they're actually looking incredibly good, and they adapted much more quickly than I thought. I think, again, this is going to be a really close match. I actually might be giving the edge to the Spark just because they look that good, and I think this roster, when they assembled it, they were like, this roster is built to win. They were one of the, even preseason, looking at the names on paper, you're like, man, this is just stacked with a ton of talent. And to see them it would be cool to see them come up and just perform insanely well, be able to adjust a lot more quickly than they were in season. But I do think it's going to be a close match. And again, I won't be shocked if Atlanta win either. Because again, we've seen that their highs are incredibly high. It's just that they are less consistent. And then the last match, the LA Gladiators versus the Shock. I am still picking the Shock to win this one. I do think despite the loss to the Reign, the Shock should still be a pretty heavy favorite to at least make it to grand finals out of that losers bracket side. The big thing with the Shock that we saw was kind of a little bit of shakiness around how they wanted to coordinate with their DPS line and some uncharacteristic, communication, miscues that we saw with some of their old timings and some of their team fights. I think they shored it up really well against London. So I'm looking forward to seeing, the Shock kind of regroup. They looked like they were able to recover very quickly, which is always a good thing. So I am still picking them as a favorite to come out of the losers bracket. I will be kind of a bit surprised if they lose to the Gladiators, just because I think a Shock that is performing at their best still does beat out a Los Angeles Gladiators team, even if they are performing at their best. I think the Gladiators are really reliant on trying to get these openings for, Surefour Death Blossom, and then Hydration if he's playing the Doomfist. However, I think that the Shock should have ways to shut that down. And if both teams are performing at their best, I think the Shock still wins. So yeah, that's kind of my rundown and assessment of going into this next week of playoffs. The match I'm looking forward to the most is definitely the NYXL versus Vancouver Titans. I'm really pleasantly surprised at the NYXL's performance thus far, and I just hope for a really great series between those teams. So those are my predictions for the upcoming weekend. If you vehemently disagree or agree, let me know on Twitter or in the comments below. And then, as always, for more esports coverage, keep it here on ESPN.com/esports.